WWE wrestlers are often extraordinary human beings who must possess remarkable strength and perseverance to succeed in the ruthless world of sports entertainment. And as you can imagine, their lifestyle is not only inspiring, but also fascinating to study.
It's a pleasure to meet you on the Wrestling Paradise.
To explore the case of Randy Orton together. You will learn, among other things, how he managed to come back with the best physique of his life at Survivor Series in 2023, even though doctors advised him to end his career. How did he manage to overcome depression in 2022 after his injury? But also the incredible product he consumed just before his match against Gunther at
King and Queen of the Ring.
And all the secrets we could really learn about his champion routine.
You are on the Wrestling Paradise.
Let's talk about Randy Orton's lifestyle. Here we go. Randy Orton, a name that immediately inspires a lot of different feelings among many wrestling fans, particularly the idea that he has evolved significantly as a human being throughout his career. It's true that the antics Randy Orton engaged in when he was younger in his career, his excesses, and his various misadventures have become legendary. But today, that's not what we're going to talk about, even if it's somewhat related to one of the things we will observe about his transformation, particularly mental. Hold on tight, we're going to talk about it. First of all, regarding Randy Orton, it should be noted that from a physical standpoint, he hasn't always been the same. What hasn't changed is that he has always been tall, at 1.96 meters. It's true that in wrestling, that's a rather normal height. On the other hand, his weight has changed quite a bit. And especially, there is a before and after his injury in 2022. At that time, he suffered what can be considered the biggest injury of his career. At least the one that caused him the longest absence. It should be noted that generally, before this injury and the transformations it led to, you will see, it's really exciting. It changed everything for him. He usually weighed around 108 kilos, except that from his return, we clearly saw it at Survivor Series 2023 when he came back. And by the way, in that show, he wasn't the only one who returned. There was also a certain CM Punk. Since then, he has admitted that he hovers around 124 kilo, whereas before, he weighed, can you believe it, 20 kilos less. So what do we observe when looking at his physique? That during his absence, he gained 20 kilos of muscle. Can you even imagine how hard he must have worked and how much there is to learn from this incredible evolution? Because yes, it's certain that we see Randy Orton as he was before this injury. He already had an admirable physique in 2009, for example, which personally is the version I find, in any case, my favorite of him. He was already at his peak as a character. But I also think that physically, he was at his best at that time. Already, just that physique alone was probably a goal for many athletes, regardless of our level, I would say. But in the meantime, he has evolved even more, and that is fascinating. One must also be aware that he was born in 1980, so realize that he had the biggest weight gain, the most muscular phase of his life, the biggest transformation, the greatest evolution he has ever experienced, even though he was somewhat older, let's say, during that period, between 42 and 44 years old. So, already, a great lesson we can learn from him is that it's never too late. Do you realize that he himself said he considered himself to be in the prime of his life? So what does he mean by that? In the best shape of his life, in the best health of his life. He saw himself continuing for many more years from the moment he returned, being, according to him, with the best physique he has ever had. We are still talking about a man who started his career in 2002, so he has over 20 years of experience, and yet he felt like he was in the shape of his life. The great lesson we can take from this, which applies to all of us as human beings, regardless of our realities or situations, is that by making certain changes and altering some habits, as he did, you will see that no matter our age or situation, we can change everything and reach levels we have never achieved in our lives at any moment, before saying that you are the proof of it. And by the way, let's immediately talk about his past habits. He himself said so. First of all, we need to be aware of one thing. He said it himself, which is that for many years, Randy Orton, unfortunately, fell quite a bit into pain medications. So, what made him someone addicted to it in reality, and what was something that ruined his life. By the way, for the more observant, is very evident on his face and physique. The difference between periods like that between 2005 and 2007, when he was clearly addicted to all of it, and the time after, when he was less so, is notable. It's a matter of phases. For example, take Randy Orton in 2009 and compare him to his version from 2005. They look like two different human beings. The fundamental difference is that on one side, there was a consumption of all kinds of pills, while on the other, there was a much healthier lifestyle. Let's not forget that when he started in the sports entertainment industry, he was, shall we say, the protege of Triple H and Ric Flair, among others. And when you mention Ric Flair, you think of a big party, debauchery, and alcohol as well. So let's say he was somewhat influenced by that. But in the meantime, he has still evolved a lot. In 2009, as I said, it had nothing to do with it, but all those years, let's say it was perhaps a bit unstable for Randy Orton. He had periods where he seemed fitter than others, but what really marked a significant turning point, as he recounted, was when he fell ill in June 2021, and not at the time of his injury in 2022, which we can say was the trial that pushed everything much further. So, related to the health context of the time, and he had to be absent for a few weeks. And it was still quite serious, as he lost 10 kilograms at that time. And for Randy Orton, this was a significant moment where he questioned himself. He realized that he needed to change certain things. He recounted that after that period, he completely stopped consuming alcohol and sugar. So, you will see later in the video that, surprisingly, it still happened that he made some exceptions, especially concerning sugar. But basically, a life challenge literally pushed him to eat better, to live healthier. He also said that he was training harder. However, what had not changed at that time and what would come later is that he still had problems with his shoulders and back. And this is very important to be fully aware of in the case of Randy Orton, to realize that we are talking about a man who started his wrestling career specifically in the main roster, that is to say, WWE, around 2002. So, from 2002 to 2021, we are already talking about almost 20 years of career, with, obviously, injuries. We know that sports entertainment is a highly physical field that can also be very dangerous. At the physical level, it can lead to serious injuries. Unfortunately for some, it has even been fatal. What characterizes him is that he has accumulated injuries over the years from his archeos. Let's not forget that when he performs an archeo, the move that many of us love and that makes him so famous, it is something that destroys his back and has severely affected it for many years. And despite the fact that he questioned his habits due to illness in 2021, resulting in significant weight loss, he still could not train in all possible areas of bodybuilding. Additionally, he was not able to fully recover from his injuries, which, even if he could hide them, were not truly healed. He had, in this case, his back and shoulders in poor condition. Generally speaking, there were certain exercises he couldn't do or didn't do, and some areas he wasn't working on. However, that didn't stop him from saying in early 2022, shortly before his injury, that he still felt he was in the best shape of his life. At that moment, Randy Orton had not yet seen anything, as shortly after, in the spring of 2022, he seriously injured himself. And at that moment, it was a big challenge. And personally, I learned things about him at that time that, honestly, I admit that I would have had a hard time imagining. Basically, at that moment, with the injury he experienced, he went through a real depression. Because basically, these doctors told him that they really advised him to stop his career and that he should completely quit wrestling because it was far too dangerous and harmful to the condition of his body. However, despite everything, we will return to the psychological aspect of all this later. He was still able to have surgery and things went well. At that point, he gradually started to work more and more, and especially to do exercises. Thus, engaging in a physical regimen that he hadn't done for years. Basically, think of it as if Randy Orton is reinventing himself after his injury, because certain areas of his body felt brand new, completely healed, while for years he could hardly do anything with them. So, it's something that did him a lot of good. Basically, exercises, things that during all his, let's say his 30s, he couldn't do, suddenly became possible. And for him, that was great. He no longer had pain in that area, especially, for example, in the lower part of his back. He had no more pain, and that felt good to him. A funny anecdote, well, as I mentioned just before, he certainly claims that he has stopped eating sugar. But what we learned about something he did before his match against Gunther at
King and Queen of the Wing
in 2024 still suggests that Randy Orton sometimes makes small exceptions and is occasionally a little, let's say, tempted by certain things. What are we talking about? A jar of Nutella. Yes, he mentioned that. Just before that famous match, he consumed an entire jar of Nutella. So, in terms of sugar and calories, it was quite something. He really went for it that day. And what's funny is that he admitted he stole the jar from the WWE canteen and consumed it entirely before his match, which helped him gain he said about 4 kilos that night, and that he was himself. So he said himself that he was really stuffed with sugar just before. And what's funny is that this is precisely where interpretation is needed. In an interview with Cody Rhodes, he said that basically his consumption of Nutella was a bit of his secret weapon, his secret, his little routine that he hid from everyone. But well, he admitted it, and he said, so there. That's the big question. Was it humor or was he serious? It's up to each person to make their own interpretation. He said that his trapezius muscles, for example, are clearly visible since his return, and we immediately noticed that in terms of build, they were broader than before. He said that his trapezius muscles were allowed, or we could say, were there thanks to Nutella. So, we shouldn't be naive either. It's not with Nutella that you build muscle. On the other hand, what is certain is that it probably made him fatter, or at least he might have been filled with energy because of it. In any case, when it comes to discussing his diet, it's the perfect opportunity to transition into that topic. We need to generally distinguish between certain information that can be found on the web, which sometimes comes from sources that, while everyone is free to trust what they want, tend to promote their own agenda. They highlight certain methods or diets that, if you look closely, they claim are the diets of specific stars. However, in reality, many of these diets can be quite similar. You might think, no, actually, it's just a marketing argument to say it's Randy Orton's diet, but in reality, you can realize that truly reliable information on this subject, coming from none other than him, is very, very, very rare. That's why I'm not going to tell you, perhaps in a certain way. Like, one might try to do this by seeing some information on the web that Randy Orton has egg whites for breakfast. He has a very high protein diet. So, this is undoubtedly the case because we know that this is a truth in bodybuilding in general. To build muscle, we need protein. That's a fact. But after that, when it comes to the precise details, we don't have them. In any case, we don't have them from truly reliable sources. On the other hand, what we have that is reliable and straight from the horse's mouth, I want to say, is that he really let it all out. Basically, he admitted himself that he tended to have a pretty poor diet, in his own words, before his injury. So, what's quite funny is that we could still see, perhaps, in some videos, sometimes when seeing him backstage, that he didn't seem to be a big eater or indulge in all sorts of excesses. Someone who could even sometimes eat salad or something like that. Yet he himself says that his diet before was terrible. He found, for example, that he was generally taking the easy way out by relying on protein drinks and dietary supplements, especially to provide his body with macronutrients, etc. But he found that before there wasn't enough solid food and real food. at all. Not just drinks or supplements, whatever they may be, but everything he needed as intake in a day. He said that this is the main difference between the long period before his injury and the time after. And that is quite significant information. One realizes that Randy Orton for years might have been able to find refuge. Well, that's not really the right word because in itself, it's not harmful. But basically, relying on the ease of taking certain supplements and not necessarily making the effort in terms of discipline regarding a diet. Whereas, after his injury, yes. Next, in terms of his training, as you may have understood, what has mainly changed is that thanks to finally being well operated on after a serious injury, particularly to his back, he has been able to do exercises again that he hadn't done for many years. He himself said that there were a lot of things, a lot of nerves that were completely shattered in his body, and that at times, after his injury, he couldn't even sit down or go to the bathroom without experiencing extreme pain, or without feeling his legs, or at one point, not being able to feel his legs at all. There were moments when his movements were very difficult to execute, and he even ended up on the ground. This is when you realize just how much he was really in a bad state at the time of his injury. But the fact is that this is all history now since he had the surgery. And what he mainly said about his injury, which we can really take away as information on this, is that he said, and honestly, it's true that you can hear some discussions where people advise to take pleasure in the gym, to love training, to appreciate all of that, to enjoy it. But for him, Randy Orton, he doesn't have that vision at all. He says that if you enjoy going to the gym and if you love your weightlifting sessions, then you are probably not training correctly. It's quite a strong statement, and he made it during an interview with Logan Paul. According to him, basically, normally, weightlifting should be about suffering. You must hate this. And if you don't hate it, according to Randy Orton, the legend killer, so it's not just anyone saying this, if basically you love it and you're all smiles and really enjoying it, then unless you're maybe a masochist, normally you should hate weightlifting according to him. Randy Orton also said that he advocates, and this is what he does, to do 1.5 hours of intense training rather than 3 hours, for example, but less intense. Basically, he emphasizes intensity. And above all, we are now going to talk about what is, for me, the most fascinating aspect of this great ordeal he experienced in 2022, which is the evolution of his state of mind and mindset, which is fundamentally the basis of all lifestyle and transformation. He himself said that when he learned that the doctors were advising him to stop his career, or even that he was really in bad shape physically, he cried. He cried. So, can you only imagine Randy Orton being in tears, being, as he said himself, like a baby, like a child, all sad, because he saw one of the things he loves most in his life being taken away from him after his injury. Keep in mind that during this long absence, for a significant part of it, he was in depression. He mentioned that he experienced 6 months of depression, a period during which he played quite a bit of the video game Elden Ring, by the way. It is also beautiful to highlight that in a message he sent to a fan who asked him for advice, particularly regarding mental health and depression, Randy Orton told him that he advised finding the motivation to start something and then having the consistency and discipline not to stop what one has started. In this case, regarding Randy, he said that it was about eating well, taking care of his back, working out at the gym, and above all, seeing the results afterward. These 3 things basically are what he had to start during his depression and hold on to all the time without stopping, and what he has achieved in overcoming depression in his case. He also advised finding something for each of us, each in our own way, where you can see the progress in what you do. And he even said that if it involves the idea of helping others, then it is also wonderful. Basically, the principle is to be able to see something where you improve, and that has done him a lot of good. He also said that becoming a father changed him internally, that his wife helped him a lot, and of course, that he had mentors to develop a champion's mentality and mindset. He has often cited John Cena, who seems to have influenced him greatly, and who was not just an opponent in his career, but a true source of inspiration. Also, with Edge, with whom he had been in a tag team at one time. For him, what has truly been key, and we will conclude with this, is having a gift from life, like a second chance at a moment when he was supposed to, in any case, end his career. And since he realizes that nothing is guaranteed for him, that everything is truly like a miracle, that in principle he should have even stopped his career in 2022, he has started to appreciate things much more and is therefore even more motivated by the idea of to live fully, to give your all to everything, to take nothing for granted. Every second in the ring, every moment when he is healthy and able to do whatever he wants, he does not take anything for granted, since he has truly been on the edge, so to speak. And here is one of the great lessons, perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from Randy Orton, which is that you should never take anything for granted from a mental perspective when you see how quickly things can change. In his case, after an injury, disappearing and coming to a halt. When you experience that, you learn to appreciate things much more. Nevertheless, it's still crazy to think that Randy Orton experienced depression, and despite the successes he had, despite what he had already accomplished at that point in his life, but that, all things considered, and it's still a beautiful lesson in life, after hitting rock bottom, he came back better than ever. And that's something we can only admire about the Viper. And this is how this video on Randy Orton's lifestyle comes to an end. We could see how much his long absence from sports entertainment after his injury changed everything for him. Over time, he has grown as a person, improving both physically and mentally, no longer taking anything for granted, and his longevity can only inspire admiration. I would like to propose a debate. Which version of Randy Orton do you find the best from a physical standpoint in his career? Let us know what you think. It will be interesting to discuss this together in the comments and share our opinions.
We can say that this topic raises a lot of questions. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay in the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?